Thank you, Deputy Speaker. Deputy Speaker, all of us in this House have children in our lives who are important to us. I am the mother of 1- and 4-year-old boys who are the centre of my existence, and I'm a former foster parent. The welfare of Australian children is one of the driving passions of my life as a person and as a politician. And I talked about this in my first speech. Every time a child in this country is abused, is harmed by another, this parliament has failed. It is our job to protect them, and that much should be beyond debate. But, Deputy Speaker, we fail far too much. The sexual abuse of children is abhorrent. It sickens me, it sickens everyone in this parliament. I believe, and Labor believes, that the people who commit these crimes must be punished. Most sex crimes are state offences, but as a Commonwealth Parliament we play an important and growing role in protecting Australian children. We are responsible for offences that relate to telecommunications and offences that occur overseas, and it is child abuse occurring in these contexts that is the subject of most of this bill. Deputy Speaker, I have the great privilege of working with a lot of organisations within my portfolio area that protect Australian children. One of them is the Alana and Madeline Foundation. You would remember Alana and Madeline. They were 3 and 6 years old when they were very tragically killed in the Port Arthur massacre. And the organisation that is their namesake was created by their very brave father, Walter Mikak. The CEO of that organisation is fond of saying that protecting children on the internet is the defining child protection issue of our age. And I don't think any parliamentarian, any parent in the community would have a different view about that. The reality is that children today face dangers that didn't even exist 10 years ago. They didn't exist when any of us in this chamber were children, Deputy Speaker. And these changes are not academic. They are not the invention of tabloid newspapers. They are absolutely and completely real. In this country, we are seeing massive growth in the number of people who are viewing and sharing child abuse images. Indeed, the volumes are so large that the federal police do not have the ability to investigate and prosecute more than a very small portion of perpetrators. The Australian Federal Police receive more than 10,000 reports of child exploitation every year, and we know that that number is growing every year. And that is just the offences that we are aware of, Deputy Speaker. We are seeing incredibly disturbing trends with how the crimes in this area are changing on the internet. We're seeing sexual predators target children to produce abuse materials themselves on apps that many of the children of the people in all of our communities use, things like Snapchat and Musical.ly. We are seeing the growth of absolutely disgusting trading and selling of child abuse materials on the darknet. And we are seeing the use and growth of FaceTime and Skype to target the abuse of children who are living in poor countries right throughout our region. Deputy Speaker, the National Police in the Philippines receive over 6,000 cyber sex abuse case referrals every month from other law enforcement agencies around the world. Speaker, I want to take a moment just to mention the men and women who are working in the Australian Federal Police, who have to review, who have to handle, who have to classify this material when they go to work every day. I just cannot say how strongly I commend the bravery of the officers who undertake this work. It is so difficult, Deputy Speaker, that the Australian Federal Police officers who do it have to work constantly in pairs. They're not allowed to work on this alone. They have to have regular psychological checkups. And, Speaker, I know from talking to Australian Federal Police officers that the sole reason that they go to work to do this, frankly, traumatic work every day is because they care so deeply for the children who are at the other end of these images. And I know we speak as one voice as a parliament when we say how much we truly appreciate the efforts of those officers. Speaker, I believe, and Labor believes, that due to these extensive changes in the way that child abuse is proliferating online, there is a need to review the law in this area, and that is why the opposition will be supporting this bill with some amendments. Speaker, I want to talk about some of the areas that we believe are particularly worthy of support in this bill, and one of those is the additional supports that this law will provide to vulnerable witnesses. And in this context, Deputy Speaker, of course we're referring mainly to children who are going to sit in court and testify against adults who are older, who are stronger, who are much more powerful than they are. Those children exhibit incredible bravery in willingness to tell their stories to try to prevent further abuse of other children. They deserve every protection that the law can provide to them, and we are very pleased to see some improvements being made in the bill before the House in this area. We are supportive, Deputy Speaker, of the new grooming offences that are contained in the bill. We're supportive of the clarification this bill provides on the scope of some of the child sex offences that are contained in the Criminal Code. Deputy Speaker, we also support the change in the terminology that is contained in this bill. The bill changes the words that we use to describe the material in question to child abuse materials. Now, this may sound like a small thing, but it is absolutely not. We talk often in the public realm about this problem being called child pornography, but that does not recognise the seriousness and the abject criminality which is at the heart of these images. Deputy Speaker, these images harm children. They harm children in the creation of the images, but every time those images are accessed, every time they are viewed, there is an additional violence and an additional abuse being undertaken. That is because every time those images are looked at, there is further humiliation done to that child. And because every time those images are looked at, there are people, citizens of this country, who are doing something to support an industry which only thrives and survives on the abuse of some of the most vulnerable people in our community. Speaker, Labor is of the view that the crimes contained in this bill are so horrendous that there are in fact some areas that need a much tougher approach. And I want to talk about some of the amendments that Labor will be making to this bill to make sure that the pedophiles who are harming children are locked up for as long as we can manage. Deputy Speaker, child sex abuse which involves subjecting the child to cruel, inhumane or degrading treatment, or which causes the death of that child, is barbaric. We want courts to be able to lock up people who commit this horrendous crime, really what must be the worst crime that can be committed. We want the judges to have power to put those people away for life, Deputy Speaker. And so Labor will move amendments in the Senate to bring in life imprisonment for aggravated sex offenders. Speaker, Labor will be moving further amendments to increase the maximum sentences for the most serious child sex crimes by 5 years to 20 and 25 years imprisonment. We believe that predators who go overseas to prey and abuse vulnerable children should face tougher penalties than in what the government has proposed. Speaker, Labor is particularly sickened by the examples that we are aware of where vile website moderators encourage other people who are part of these horrendous networks to commit crimes against children. People who incite violence, cruel, inhumane or degrading treatment towards children deserve further punishment. They are the despicable ringleaders of these child abuse networks. They facilitate the production and distribution of sometimes sadistic and brutal material, and courts must be able to punish them appropriately. Deputy Speaker, Labor will be moving amendments to add aggravated offences to target these vile criminals. We will also target offenders who play a role in coordinating, organising or inciting other people's participation in these most serious sex offences with new aggravating sentencing factors. We want child sex offenders to be appropriately punished, and we want to focus on the worst offenders because bringing them down is critical to stop the proliferation of these absolutely sickening crimes. Speaker, the way that Labor has looked at and tackled this bill is with only one issue in mind, and that is the protection of children. That is our only goal here. The government's bill contains mandatory minimum sentences, and this is the only section of the bill that we will oppose. And we will do that because these sections of the bill will not make Australian children safer. We made this decision very thoughtfully and with extensive expert advice. And indeed, Speaker, there is almost a uniform view in the law enforcement and legal community that this is a legal device which will not further protect Australian children. Indeed, it may have the opposite effect. Prosecutors are opposed to this measure. The Law Council and just about every other organisation like them is opposed to it. In fact, Deputy Speaker, the Attorney-General's Department, part of the government that sits on the other side of the House, is also opposed to this measure. Mandatory minimums let guilty people off the hook because juries are less likely to convict them when they know there is no discretion about the sentence. Mandatory minimums mean that criminals will not cooperate with police to bring the kingpins who run these networks to justice. I don't want pedophiles on the street, Deputy Speaker. I've got 2 children. I shouldn't need to say that. And I don't want to put them away for 5 years. I want to catch the kingpins who are the drivers of this disgusting behaviour, and I want judges to be able to put them away for life. And that is what Labor's amendments will allow for. Speaker, one of the additional issues in this bill is that the mandatory minimum sentences will have very significant unintended consequences. As the bill stands as drafted, Schedule 6 would attach a mandatory 5-year jail term to an 18-year-old in a consensual relationship with a 15-year-old. I just want to make that clear to people who are listening here. What the government is proposing would mean that an 18-year-old in a consensual relationship with a 15-year-old would end up in jail for 5 years. Now, Deputy Speaker, the Law Council has provided some examples of some of the behaviour that they believe will be captured by these provisions, and I want to share with you some of their examples. One of them is an 18-year-old and a 15-year-old who go on a school trip together. They might be a Year 10 and a Year 12 student. They engage in sexual activity overseas. Under this bill, the older person in the relationship would be up for a mandatory 5-year jail term. That means the judge has no discretion about whether that punishment fits the crime. Deputy Speaker, we are speaking here about 18-year-olds and 15-year-olds who are engaged in sexual activity over Snapchat. This is something that a lot of teenagers do. What the Law Council points out is that this behaviour between a 15-year-old and a 17-year-old in a consensual relationship is perfectly legal. On the day the older person turns 18, suddenly that person has committed a range of federal offences and will go to jail for a minimum of 5 years. Now, Deputy Speaker, these are crimes. A consensual sexual relationship between a 15-year-old and an 18-year-old is a crime, and I don't devalue that. But does the Justice Minister really believe that the young people in this relationship belong in jail for 5 years? I want to return, Deputy Speaker, to the bill at large. I do believe that this parliament needs to send a clear message that the sexual abuse of children is absolutely intolerable. Not only is it intolerable, but this parliament universally regards this as the most heinous crime that can be committed. We will be supporting this bill and we will be strengthening it because we want to send pedophiles to jail for longer. I say that as the parent of 2 young boys who are right in the age of target for these horrendous criminals. Labor has and always will fight to protect children here and overseas. Indeed, Deputy Speaker, we have a long history of acting to protect children in this way. It was Labor under former Prime Minister Paul Keating that introduced some of the first offences that targeted children who are sexually abused, and those were world-leading laws at the time. The previous Labor government did extensive work in this area. One of the examples I want to point to, Deputy Speaker, was the establishment of the Royal Commission into Institutional Responses to Child Sexual Abuse. That was the first inquiry of its kind at a national level. Now, one of the most important roles of that Royal Commission, which is still underway, Deputy Speaker, is understanding this problem better and providing advice to this and other parliaments around the country about what we can do to improve the law in this area, and we will be keenly awaiting their final report to consider further law reform. Deputy Speaker, Labor wholeheartedly supports the object of this bill. We have no tolerance for child sexual abuse, but we believe this bill needs to contain even stronger messages of our condemnation for these horrible crimes. We'll be pleased to support this bill with strengthening measures in the Senate. Thank you.